All right, everyone, welcome back to episode 2 of Quick Fix Fantasy. I am Chris P, and I am joined once again, like always, by Dr. Doug Liebe. What is up, Doug?
How's it going? I was telling you, but I just got back from my wife's graduation from Virginia Tech. She is now a doctor as well, so we have two doctors in the house now.
Nice.
Um, but she's going to become a professor, and I didn't want to go the academia route, which is why I'm here today with you. But yeah, she's going to go the more traditional route and become a professor now. So we're moving. Yeah, so go Pokes, Oklahoma State.
Go
I don't
Pokes.
know much about it, but we'll be living there soon. But
Hell
yeah, how
yeah.
are you?
I'm doing good. Congratulations to the missus. That's awesome. I'm doing good. We got a nice 80-degree day here. I am sweating balls, so, don't have the AC cranking yet, but I'm getting by. I'm not going to complain. But all in all, really good. Very nice week of Call of Duty coming up. We got some bounty matches, which makes for some good matches. And, even just in general, just good matches to watch, some really cool ones. But, before we dive into those, you guys listened to the first episode. I'm hoping if you haven't, go back and listen to it. But there was a lot of learning that came out of it. And Doug, I want to know your takeaways from what you looked into last week, what you ended up picking, and just kind of lessons that you learned.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned it last week, but like this is a learning process for me as well. I've played a lot of daily fantasy in my time. I've played a lot of player props, but I haven't played a ton of Call of Duty daily fantasy or player props. And so, yeah, this is a learning experience for me too. And so it is interesting to think about some of the things that already I'm starting to see maybe are more important or less important than I thought. So you had tweeted out, and there was a clip on Twitter about me talking about how DraftKings pricing works, and something that I think is funny because it has been true so far this season, but was not true last weekend at all, which is that like typically DraftKings prices their players fairly close to their average. So yeah, like if you have a player who's on a bad team and he's losing most games, that player will end up being a little cheaper, even if they might be favored in the game. But last week, DraftKings went all the way the other way and said Florida is slightly favored against LAG despite never being favored against anyone else. Let's make Cap still 10K. Let's make everybody on the team really expensive. And so like I see this week we're getting a little bit more of the same here with London. We've got Nasty at 10K despite having over 100 points like one time. So I think that's one interesting thing to note is that you can't rely on DraftKings to just do the same thing every week. Some rules may not apply every time. I still think it is important to look, and I think matchup is still really crucial. I would almost say like in the opposite way, like London is slightly favored over LAG, but like looking at 10K, I'm not going to be willing to pay that very much. So I'm keeping in mind the matchup here when I look at the price always. A lot of the time, if they're just in an average matchup, that's fine. You just look at it and you say, yep, that looks about right. But yeah, I look at that nasty 10K and I go, whoa, like I don't want to play that. So I think that's one big takeaway. I think my other takeaway, I played some cash games this weekend, so it's just like one-on-one games. Played some head-to-heads, double up type stuff. So you're just like trying to come up with the most consistent lineup that you can. And I do think that there is some interesting value in lower price underdog teams. So team selection on DraftKings, teams are cheaper than players. They don't score as many points. But because the range of outcomes for teams is so small, but the range in prices, to me, it seems to be bigger. Like the cheapest teams can be like $2,000. And but the range of outcomes between their average and like the best teams in the league is very small. And so like I rolled with Vegas both Friday and Saturday. Obviously, they did pretty well, but they exceeded expectation hugely. Even if they had poor games, the fact that I could play people like Pred with a BZ and Hydra or something like that is it. I think it might more than make up for the fact that you're getting a little less full upside. You're not getting any 3-0 sweeps out picking underdogs usually, but like 3-0 sweeps, you only get 5 extra points for a sweep on the team spot. So like, yeah, that's my other takeaway is like I think cheap teams, it might be key to getting an extra stud in your lineup.
Okay, that's a big one. But I looked on there today too. It's funny because you're just like, what do they know that I don't? And that was the same thing. I think Nasty's the third most expensive on DraftKings right now, behind Celium and Awakening. And
Yes.
I was like, wow, okay, what do they know that I don't do? But that's interesting. But when it comes to these lineups that you're building, I know that you and I talked about waiting for, the map selections to come out or waiting for, the last possible minute that you can, just because that's when you get all the information. Why is it so important, to you to wait until you at least see the maps? Is it something that, you've run into in the past, you made a mistake with, or is it just, common knowledge or should be?
Yeah, I think this is much bigger, a very important thing on prize picks, especially because while map one is going, usually you can still bet map two and so on. And so you can yeah, you can wait. The map sets usually come out 45 minutes before. So yeah, I think this would be the little mini lesson of the day here, but it's just what I'm calling kill environment, which is just it's think about it like park factors in baseball. Like in baseball, a guy might have hit a home run one out of every 20 times, but if he's playing in a park where the wind's blowing straight out to left center field and he's a righty, he might hit a home run like an extra another 1 out of 20 times or something like that. And that makes a huge difference. So if you want to wait to find out what the weather is for some of these guys, that's like a legitimate DraftKings and player prop strategy is to wait and find out. So the kill environment to me is we wait and find out what the maps are because and yeah, as you said, is it something that I've been burned by or something that is more obvious? I think to me, it's something that's a bit more obvious just coming from a coaching and being in the scene background. I know how much of an effect the map has on how the pace of play in the game and stuff like that. I think you think about Bokage, that was a map that every bad team wanted to square up on because anybody could get lucky on it. It's just a fast-paced map that can go either way. So from a kills perspective, we talked a little about this last week, but the idea that you want to know how the rate at which a player gets kills and then how long the game is going to be. If they can get 2 kills every minute, you got to know how many minutes the game is going to be to know how many kills they're going to get. And so yeah, certain maps play slower, certain maps play faster, certain maps play faster for certain types of players or whatever. So an example from my last week, the Optic versus Atlanta match, game one was Fortress Hardpoint. And that's a map. I didn't really have any bets on that game going into the game. And then when the map set came out and I saw Fortress, Fortress is a very fast map. Obviously, for anyone that watches it, you know that it's extremely fast, especially for subs. But the 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 map was being favored heavily favored towards Optic. I think most people, the bookmakers included, had Optic as pretty big favorites on map one Fortress. And so I looked at that and using just sort of back of the envelope type of calculation of okay, how much faster is this game going to play? How much longer might this game go or shorter because Optic is favored? I got to the Shotzi over Celium under, which ended up hitting. But I said, that's a bet I'm never making until I know what the map is. When I looked at just the overall averages for those two players, they were about in line with what PrizePicks had on the board. But as soon as I find out that map is Fortress, I'm giving Shotzi almost 2 additional kills per map that I'm estimating here just from the pace of the game and then how favored they are in the game. And that's how I can get to Shotzi over. The sell under was a little easier with FaZe not being favored. The ARs he's going to be playing slower, probably get into less engagements. I think he was at 22 and a half. He ended up coming in at 19. I really like that bet. And I think it really gives paints up a good picture of how you can think about kill environments in these games. So yeah, I think honestly the only bets I'm making on prize picks before I know the map sets are S&D because in S&D the maps don't really matter. You got to get 4 kills every round before the round's going to end regardless for the most part obviously. But those are the bets I make beforehand. And I do tend to last week I did a lot of mixing those S&D bets in. So I had a list of them that I already knew were good bets or I thought were good bets. And I would sort of just mix and match them in with these bets as the maps come up because you got to have somebody else to pair with these. You find the Shotzi over and maybe sell under doesn't look good. You got to have something to pair it with. So yeah, I hold on to these S&D bets and then sort of mix them in. So yeah, S&D is the one where you can bet ahead of time. But other than that, I'd much rather wait. You don't want to get burned, even if it looks like a clear over situation, but then you get a Hydro hard point and it's great. I thought I had it, and then now Hydro plays incredibly slowly. Yeah. So I think the lesson here is think about the kill environment. If you're going to be making bets on maps 1, 3, 4, probably at least wait until you get the maps and modes. There are a few people on Twitter that tweet them out, and then you can also just go to the CDL's website. If you just keep refreshing the page for the match, when the maps finally get determined, it'll just show up on the site. So you can check the maps ahead of time. Think about how those maps affect things.
That's a big thing, especially if you come from a traditional wagering background where when the line comes out, that's where you're usually gonna get best odds on whoever's favored. And they're you want to lock it in and be cool, all that. So I think that's in a lot of people's heads that like you lock it in ASAP so it doesn't change on you. But I'm not saying that these companies aren't smart enough to do it because this is still in its infancy. But like as of right now, I don't see the maps come out and then lines really change. And I think that's something that might start catching up. But as of right now, I haven't seen that happen.
Yeah, I will say at least this weekend I did that. My experience was definitely, I'll give Prize Picks credit. I saw most lines move when, especially Hydro Fortress, like the fastest and the slowest maps, when they were coming out, I was seeing lines move pretty much every time. Sometimes, and I don't know, yeah, I think most of the time, if you didn't get in before the line movement, most of the value was gone. I didn't see many situations where they adjusted, but not enough. It was really a matter of getting in at the right time before they made the adjustment. I had tweeted something about how Hydra he bumped like 2 additional kills or something like that in their game, which is about what I had gotten to. But by the time I got to it, Hydra was already a bad play. But yeah, I think from like a traditional player props betting, like if you've been using Prize Picks for other things, like typically the best time to hit Prize Picks is immediately when they get posted. So like you hear people waiting till 1 a.m. to wait for baseball Prize Picks to come, or waking up early in the morning because yeah, the lines haven't moved much. In COD, it's almost the opposite. If you're betting on the like map one lines before you know the map set, like you're basically just shooting in the dark. Like you have no idea what map it's going to be. So, and it can make such a significant difference. And I'll also give credit to Prize Picks in general. Yeah, they're very, although they have to pick a line, they're usually fairly on. So like yeah, the maps can give you that edge that you need in a lot of cases. Um, and I not to harp back on it, but like yeah, looking at the bookmaker odds for these games to determine, because I think the one thing other than map that makes probably a bigger difference on the end amount of kills is like how favored a team is, or like the success that the team will have that you're trying to predict. And that's what the bookmakers are doing when they give you the lines on these games, or maybe even like the spread and the hard point. I know Bet365 will do that. Like that can be really useful information. So like if you think about a player as having some sort of inherent rate at which they get kills, they get a kill every 30 seconds or something. When you're losing, even the fastest players rates slow down, and when you're winning, even the slowest players rates speed up, and that impact comes out to more than the additional kills that a map changes. So like yeah, I'd say the one thing you can do before you know the maps is look at the bookmaker. What are they thinking? Like, is this game going to be close? Is that mean, because that might mean that a hard point game goes long? Is this game going to be a blowout? Well, it might be a super short game. Even the best players might not get a ton. Like yeah, I'd say that's the one thing even bigger than map dynamics is the score dynamic. Like what is the final score going to be, especially in hardpoint, but in control as well. Like yeah, if you're very likely headed to a 3-2 outcome, the overs are going to have it because like if you play 5 rounds of control, regardless of who comes out on top, everybody's going over. So like yeah, it's that's the one thing that I think about beforehand.
Oh yeah, and not to abruptly change, but for the people listening, if you do wait until the end of this, you are going to have a lineup that is built by Doug Sensamat with no experience yet, speaking through a player, someone who's been in the league, and this will be the start of a competition, Doug on Doug, brains versus brawn, if you would, analytics versus out in the field. Now he's an AR, used to be a sub, really with the shooters out there. So we're gonna start going back and forth and see what wins, what comes up victorious, analytics, or actually playing the game. So it's gonna be very interesting to see. Doug Liebe himself will kind of put his own thoughts together and see if he can build a lineup, and then we're gonna start there. But it's gonna be very interesting. So when it sounds like the show concludes, I promise you it doesn't. There's a lot of good stuff coming after it. So watch till the end. It's this long for a reason. What do you? Well, first off, Doug, what are you looking forward to with this competition with Doug?
I feel like, I mean, one, yeah, I've been a proponent of Doug. Us Dougs have to look out for each other in general, so it pains me to have us pitted against each other. I do think that like I think I need to just lean into my strengths more so, try to do less of the like yeah, expecting the game situations or who's been looking good, and just lean really hard, maybe too hard into the analytics to try to differentiate myself from the other Doug because yeah, like I know, yeah, the thing, especially having known now that he doesn't know very much about DraftKings or whatever, like, so leaning into things like correlation between players and like price per dollar or points per dollar, I think will be really important because like, yeah, I know that, yeah, if he's just looking at the value of each player in a vacuum, like how good is this player because he knows these players, he knows their game. Yeah, he's familiar with their game, as Shaq would say. Like I can't win like that. But if yeah, I'm gonna try to get more on where can I find some value? Where can I open this game up? Yeah, just really lean into what I know and not try to get cute. Because yeah, if I get
Keep
cute, I'm just gonna
composure.
get rolled over.
As the COD guys say, you just got to keep composure. Don't lose composure. Stick with what you know. Point, shoot, have a straight shot. You should be okay. I believe in you, Doug.
I'm a big fundies guy.
It's
My
all about the
fundamentals are
fundies. All about the fundies. All right, so let's get into the good stuff. At a first glance, Doug, what looks good to you this weekend? I know in the first episode we dove into every game, which, we'll touch on a decent amount, but, I really want to round this out, start this off by, what's jumping to you off the board? Like I said, we got some Bonnie matches coming up, some really good matchups just in general, other than it just being Bonnie matches. What's jumping off the paper to you right now?
Yeah, I had mentioned last week, and I think it's still important to think about now, which is just that like a player's average points that they score on DraftKings or the average number of kills they get in a game too, for that matter, on PrizePicks, like that is determined over a long period of time. So like, yeah, a player's average over the whole season is determined by like the average strength of the opponents that they play. So yeah, like the best team in the league will play on average a slightly worse opponent because they never have to play themselves. But like that over the whole season, those things start to add up. But then if we're looking at a specific game, there can be situations where the team you're playing is so far removed from the average of all the coalescing of all the other teams that you've played that like maybe there's some additional value to be found. And so like ironically, I'd say one of the more interesting matchups to me is the first one, London versus LAG, because both teams have not been doing so well. And London has only won one game in recent memory that I can think of against Vegas. But they're big favorites, I think. What is the Yeah, they're not big favorites, slight favorites against LAG. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that game plays out from like who's going to be the one to prove the advantage on London? Who's going to be the one? So, I mean, obviously we talked about it. DraftKings seems to think that it's going to be Nasty who comes out on top. It is interesting to note, though, that the last time that London won, it was Scraps who had the best game. He scored over 100 fantasy points in their game against Vegas. So it is interesting to see Nasty at the top. Nasty has certainly been more consistent, but consistent in them getting losses too. So I do think that as I mentioned, the score dynamics play a huge role in how fast you can get kills. And so like, although Nasty's able to rack up points when they lose, if they're winning, that changes the dynamic a lot. And so maybe it's other players that are going to be able to get those additional kills. And like, that's sort of what you see with Scraps being the one to get more kills the last time they won. So that game really interests me from the London side mostly. Although I will say, like, just looking at DraftKings for Friday, actually, I have the Sunday one up now for talking about the Doug versus Doug. But looking on Friday, I know that Exceed for LAG is very low. He's had some bad games, but some of those bad games are against really good teams. And so, like, I mean, anytime you see a guy who's in a not quite a 50-50, but I mean, that's like a 45-55 matchup, and he's at min price on DraftKings, like, I am immediately interested. Like, I'm immediately like, how bad would he have to do for me to regret playing him so that I could play more high priced guys like Celium or something like that maybe people aren't going to be able to get to if they're not playing LAG players. So yeah, I think that matchup is really interesting, and like that's maybe a spot where people can have their own intuition about how it goes. Like maybe they take a look at the map set, even because it's the first game, you might actually know the maps before you enter a DraftKings lineup. Even like, how is this game going to play out? What's London's path to victory against LAG? I think they should be favored, but it's like, how are they going to win? Because both teams are so bad, it's sometimes hard to like envision in your head the path that they have to victory.
And I don't want to, spoil anything for you yet, but, Doug, I know you're going to watch until the end of the episode. You have some similar thoughts as Doug Censor on this one. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, for people listening, I don't know what Doug said yet, although he has already done his picks. I don't know what they are yet, so that's funny to say. Funny to hear that. So, and maybe I'm glad. I've always thought there was this Doug connection, so it makes sense.
Doug and Doug, but no, this one was interesting, and like if you can't tell by listening yet, Doug Liebe, Dr. Doug is. looking into this with a different lens than I am, as a fan that just pretty much watches and thinks good, bad, okay. So to me, when we were speaking prior, I was just like, yeah, like, I don't know if that one's going to be super interesting. He's like, whoa, pump the brakes. Like, I think this is like the most interesting one. And, now it makes total sense. Um, but yeah, I was definitely shocked with the whole the nasty price on there. Was it 10-4 now?
Yeah, I think he's
10,
just 10K. Yeah,
10, 10
but
flat.
yeah, no, it's in the games where everyone knows what's gonna happen. Like, yeah, we have what is it, London, Atlanta the next day. In the games where everybody knows what's gonna happen, it's kind of boring because it's like, well, yeah, of course Atlanta. And not to say that Atlanta will win, but no one's gonna expect anything other than Atlanta winning, Sell having a pretty good game, Abizi probably popping off, and like if you play fantasy and like you're like, well, I mean, yeah, I either take a Beasley or when he puts up 150 points on me, I go, well, that's what I deserved. So those games kind of they kind of suck from a fantasy perspective. Is it's like everybody knows, everybody and their mom knows what's going to happen in that game, at least most likely. But yeah, London LAG, I don't have the slightest, and that's interesting because yeah, that uncertainty is maybe not baked into the price of these players.
Yeah. So what do you think about Mutineers versus Boston Breach?
I think it's interesting. Another game, I mean, I think obviously Boston is a big, or probably a pretty big favorite in that game. Yeah, they're pretty big favorites in that game. I think it's interesting because I've been slightly down on Boston search in general in terms of just like the strength of like how strong they've looked in search. And so it brings up another point, just a mini point here, which is just that like when you're drafting on DraftKings, you have to pick a team slot, and teams don't get that many players. And yeah, we talked about this a little, but it's interesting because the majority of the points come from search and destroy. Unlike the player slots on DraftKings, where the majority of the points come from the hard points from the respawns, because you just get points for kills. For the teams, they get points for rounds won, and search is the game that you win the most rounds. And so it's interesting because I don't hate Florida in the search against Boston. I think they're underdogs, but I have them as only like a couple points of an underdog against Boston. And so like to me, I'm looking at like how much is Florida going to be? How much is Florida? 2,400. It's tough because Vegas fits that perfectly. Vegas is a really strong search. They've been probably the second best search team all year behind FaZe, and they're at 2-2.
See,
So,
that
but
doesn't make
yeah,
sense to me. That's so
yeah.
confusing.
I mean, yeah, you just look at the average on that board. The six teams tomorrow, Vegas has the third highest fantasy points per game and is the cheapest team on the slate. So it's just, I mean, obviously they're running up against a team that's good at the mode that they're good at as well, which is kind of tough. But like, yeah, so I am interested in Florida in the team slot on DraftKings just because, yeah, if they can win the search or even put up 4 or 5 rounds, like as long as they don't get 3-0'd and just stomped, two like 2.4K is super cheap. And then yeah, maybe I can run a BZ and Sell in the game against Vegas and just double down or something like that. So yeah, I think that game is interesting from that perspective. I think from like the players on DraftKings or PrizePicks perspective, like I think that series probably goes the way that the bookmakers are thinking it is. I think Boston's pretty big favorites in that game. Florida hasn't really looked very inspiring. Going game 5 against LAG will do that to you. So not that exciting.
Yeah, I agree with you. See, this is another one that's we're gonna roll right along. I know you're talking a lot, Doug, so I'm gonna give you a little sip of your water. We got a bounty match with Vegas and Atlanta. See, to me, this isn't one that jumps off the paper, but I guarantee something in your head, in your numbers, the way you look at this, something could be interesting on this one because I know you're pretty high on Vegas, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, no, actually
Oh
no.
no.
So I've been notorious Twitter Vegas doubter. So
Oh yeah, I got a
uh,
mix up a little
yeah,
bit.
you were right about the team, but yeah, no, I'm a notorious Twitter doubter that knows nothing. But yeah, I think it's interesting, sort of for what I mentioned, which is that like Vegas is undoubtedly has been a strong search and destroy team. Bringing Standy has made them better at search, and then formidable in respawn finally. But they run into a team that's probably the only team that's clearly better than them at search, which because I think FaZe is clearly better than everyone at search right now. So I don't like them in the respawns against FaZe. It makes me nervous that they could be quick games. We've seen Vegas not look a bit shaky in some respawns recently as well. I think this is just a really tough draw for Vegas. Like I'm all for the miracle run to make champs, but I don't think that it starts here. I think Atlanta just sort of trumps each of their strengths pretty well. And Atlanta's going to be looking to bounce back after a pretty disappointing weekend last weekend. Yeah, I'm not as excited about that game. I do think the Vegas team on DraftKings for the S&D could be interesting, but I don't know. It doesn't get me super excited. 2.2K gets me sort of excited, but not. Yeah, I fail to see that going to game 5, or they might rack up some more round wins or something like that too, which is might be necessary.
You know what's interesting to me is Clayster on Friday is the lowest priced player. He is at
Oh
6,000.
yeah.
He is under Fellow, Exceed, and Yuli as, Clayster. That jumps off the paper to me. Projected like 85 points, averaging 85 points, what have you. That is something to me that is very interesting. And, as someone who doesn't know it as well, do you think that is them simply going off of who they're playing and like who the AR matchup is?
Yeah, I think it's going off who they're playing combined with like Clay's overall performance. Like I think undoubtedly Clay's looked really good the last like 3 weeks, like from the major on. I mean everyone's saying on Twitter, yeah, that he's been dominant. But he wasn't that dominant before. He was kind of getting smoked before that. And so like I think this might be a case of DraftKings sort of just looking at the overall picture and saying, "Oh, Clay's not that great." At 6K, I think that's amazing value. Like, yeah, any guy who has the potential to go whatever he went last week, 36 and 15 or whatever, like should not be 6K on the slate. I think that's a clear mispricing. It's tough because yeah, I do see a lot of like scenarios where he does end up just getting smoked again. But yeah, I think for the amount of upside he has, 6K is kind of unreasonable. And if you're talking about like a big field GPP tournament where you just are looking for a lot of upside, like stacking with a guy who's min dollar amount, and also you can get a lot of other guys in there too. Like, yeah, if he has a couple good games, you might be looking at first place overall. Because you're just gonna have so much space. Like, I mean, a Clay plus Vegas stack where you just hope they go off in one or two of the maps. They don't even need to win. Just go to map 4 or 5. Like those two leave you so much additional cash for the rest of your team. What is that like? Um, yeah, you're averaging 10.4K per additional player if you're playing Clay plus Vegas in the team slot. Like
That's
that's
insane.
that's pretty wild. Like you're paying up a little for your captain, and you're still having probably 9K left per player for the rest. You basically just take everyone off the top. So yeah, you can see the power of these cheap teams. Like all they need to do is win like one search, and you're good to go.
That's interesting. Yeah, that was what jumped off to me. We got another bounty match next. We have Atlanta and London. Lopsided, of course, but
A big rivalry.
yeah, huge.
Everyone knows.
Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's talking about it. Anything in particular that jumps out to you on this one, or is this just kind of
I mean, it's
quick?
it's a tough game. It's a trap game because of the fact that like if Atlanta does what everyone thinks Atlanta's going to do and you don't draft their players on DraftKings, you're going to be going, well, what's the Sunday slate looking like? But I think it's honestly, yeah, I mean, a BC at 9.6K, sell at 10.4, like the chance of a 3-0 here, and I talked about this last week that like 3-0s, you're getting disproportionately paid out if your team gets a 3-0. So like you don't want the games to go long when you're looking at potential 3-0s. I'd gladly have a 3-0, and for 10.4 plus 9.6K for the dynamic Atlanta duo right now in fantasy points, like I feel like I want to play them. But yeah, if they don't do well, you and 80% of the rest of the field are going to be feeling the same way. But that 20% of the field that didn't play them, if they don't 3-0, I would say they're gonna be jumping for joy because basically 80% of the field's gonna get knocked out on the first game. So yeah, I don't know. It's a trap game. I mean, yeah, Atlanta's like minus 2,000 to win or something. It's yeah, it's
So
I'd
much
say
meat on the bone right there. So much meat on the
yeah,
bone.
but you got to think about the intangibles that London's going to bring because this is a bounty match. Like they're going to want it so much so much worse. That extra 10K just yeah, I don't know. It's just crazy to think about.
That would be nice. Moving right along, we got the red hot LA Thieves versus the Florida Mutineers. People that I've heard around the internet have said that LA Thieves are arguably the best team in the league right now, really hitting form. What are your thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, I think LA Thieves will like I know they had a pretty rough weekend last weekend going 0-2. They had to play Toronto and they went game 5 against New York. I think we're yeah, anyone who's doubting LA Thieves after the 0-2 weekend, I think they're just reading recency bias a little too strongly. It'll be a quick I think that'd be a good bounce back game for 100T. But yeah, this is a great example of just like you have to look at the situation like step back a little bit. It's like these are two of the hardest teams. They narrowly lost, and now they have a really easy team as their next opponent. So I think this is a game where if you're not interested in 100T or like you're writing them off, you're gonna be disappointed that like yeah. These teams, it's easy to look bad when you play a really good team, even when you're not bad or whatever. So like I think that mixes people up sometimes. You'll see like FaZe get 3-0 stomped by Optic Texas, but then say, wow, FaZe looked horrible. They couldn't even beat Lag, and then but they're gonna smoke Lag or whatever. So like, yeah, Optic can make a team look like that. The Optic will do that to you. So yeah, I expect this to be the 100T bounce back game that most people will be expecting.
I like that. And that 0-2, does that affect pricing, within the app, you feel like? Like they're like,
Uh,
oh, they're not really doing too well right now. Like take a little off the top, or
It doesn't jump off the page to me looking. Envoy is still 10K, Octane 9K. Octane 9K is not bad at all. Considering I think I see Octane in a similar role to Abizi where like Cell and Envoy are typically the most expensive players on those teams when they're favored. But then Octane's provided, yeah, Envoy averages 96 points a game, Octane 95.8 points a game, and is 1,000 less dollars. That's the Abizi special right there, having the same amount of points as Cell, but being 1,000 less dollars a game. So I think Octane there is sort of interesting. But yeah, we still see draws at 8K, Kenny at 6.4K. That's honestly really low. That's interesting. Yeah, I like Kenny there at 6.4. That seems pretty crazy low. I do think he runs into the problem that some players on dominant teams run into, which is that there just aren't that many kills to go around. When you've got Envoy and Octane out there, like there just aren't a lot of kills to go around. So, but yeah, 6.4, that's pretty low for a team that I think would be heavily favored and like will probably do pretty well. And if they 3-0, Kenny could go whatever he went in the last game there. Yeah, he still made value for me even when he went like whatever. He set the record for the most deaths in a
yeah.
game. So like he still was a pretty good play on DraftKings even with that. So like when your team's winning, like everything's great.
Oh yeah. Seattle Surge, Optic Texas. This is an interesting one to me. Seattle, obviously, still fighting for the champs clinch. I feel like they're not the team, or they haven't been the team that people know they can be. And lowest price on the board comes from a Seattle Surge player in Lamar Accuracy. How you feeling on this?
Yeah, I think you nailed the most interesting play. Well, actually, honestly, two interesting plays here. I think Lamar accuracy I think that's a lock for me. I mean, I'll lock that in my cash games at least. 6K for the guy who I just had it up. Is he's either leading or second in hill time per game, and you're getting those extra points for the hill time. I find it very hard to believe that he's not going to be able to achieve at least minimum value at the minimum price on DraftKings. I think that's interesting. Ghosty, we see a little bit of a jump up in price. He was cheaper last week, I believe. He's 7.2 in this game. Yeah, he was only 6K against Atlanta, scored 97 points with a minute and a half of hill time. So I think I'm less excited about Ghosty than I was last week. He'd been consistently, yeah, he'd had one game over 7K and then he'd been consistently under 7K. And I think he was pretty much a good value that whole time. 7.2, meh, I'm not as excited. But I think the other interesting question mark here is Pred. And this goes back to maybe people's opinion about how the game might play out. Pred, to me, is the type of player who, even if they lose by 150 points in hardpoint, he's liable to be going 30 and 15 or something like that. And so, like, from a fantasy perspective, like, it's just pretty jarring to look at the team and like yeah you just look down the fantasy points per game. He's 8.8K and has 109 fantasy points per game, which is 9 more points than Dashy, who's almost 1,400 more on the board than him.
Yeah,
So like,
that's the highest on the whole list.
yeah, I mean, Pred, yeah, and so like the question is, do you believe that Pred will be able to put up big numbers against Optic, or is Optic going to be too much? Like, because yeah, Pred they can play some middling opponents and maybe struggle, and those are the games where Pred just eats the other team alive. And like speaking, I don't know if you saw the Nameless clip. That I love that clip of him where he's like, "I'm eating you
Oh
alive."
yeah, 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 yeah.
But yeah, like Pred has some of those games where he's the guy standing up saying, "I'm eating you alive," and his team's down 100 in hardpoint or whatever. But so like, is it going to be that, or is Optic just going to be too much? Like, I think that's a question I don't know the answer to, but maybe people have stronger opinions on. I think at 8.8K, like there's a lot of upside there. Certainly, we're talking about large field GPP where you want to just like hit that 1 in 100 shot to win the whole thing and take it down for 200x or whatever. Like, I think Pred is very lucrative at that price. He's also probably going to be pretty high owned because that's pretty cheap for a guy who averages 109 points a game. So, and yeah, so I don't know. It's interesting. I tend to believe that Optic is just too stifling. They've just looked. I mean, they've obviously looked unbelievable recently. So but Pred is Pred. Pred, yeah, Pred. He's good at search. He's good at hardpoint. He controls the pace. He wins gunfights. Like, you can't ask for much more in a player than that from a fantasy perspective or a regular perspective.
Agreed. So now we got so that was a bounty match in itself. Not that that really matters, but I like saying it to the people. And we have another bounty match now. We have the New York Subliners versus your LAG. You're an LAG fan. No, you're not gonna be biased on this. It's just numbers. I have no bias to them. I just want to put that out there in case anything seems a little lopsided, a little biased. So we have New York, who hasn't clinched champs yet either. LAG, who's pretty much out of it at this point. How are you feeling about this lineup?
I I think a lot will depend on how LAG plays in the game against London first. Because if they lose that game to London, which is they're favored to do so, I think this is just going to be a stomping because there's going to be zero hope to make champs, I think, anymore at that point. Um, uh, I don't know. Yeah, if only there was a way to measure despair per minute from watching LAG, which I get, I would I'd be in a better place to speak on this game. But yeah, I think New York I think this is a pretty easy game for New York. I think Hydra at 10.2 is pretty expensive for a guy who's going to be in a spot where he could explode in points. So like, here's a spot where I might be thinking, how do I fit Hydra in as captain? Like 10.2K in the flex, he's 15.3K for the captain spot. Like, I'm thinking, how can I afford 15.3K to get Hydra in the captain spot? Because yeah, he's liable to actually score 150 points or something like that against LAG. Yeah, so 4 of his last 5 games have been over 100. 6 games ago, he scored 141 against London. Yeah, 141 against London. Now he's looking at Lag, who's underdog to London on the day before. I think Hydra's licking his lips for this game. So yeah, that's another interesting strategy point there is like, it's always harder to captain guys who are really expensive to begin with. But like, yeah, I'd say like I had made a list here of like upper echelon guys that are just so good no matter their price because they have so much upside. Like, I'd say that Hydra's in that group. Scrap, Hydra, Cell, and Abizi, and then Dashi, I think are like the big 5 probably of like those guys at any price. At any price, they could win the tournament. They could win a GPP tournament just because they just score more points than everyone else. Like, they'll end up being the player you had to have in your lineup. Like, you could take a 0 at another spot, and you'd still have to have Hydra in your lineup some days. And like that's a rare breed of player, I think, in the DraftKings ecosystem right now. Just the way pricing is and how scoring is. Like, these guys who can put up ridiculous plus 30 plus 40 performances in a series, like, there's sometimes no price that they wouldn't be worth taking at.
Yeah. Interesting one to me is Priesta, 6,600. A little hot and cold, but I feel like, there is upside with him. 6,600 fantasy points per game, 87.8. And that is the most towards the bottom of the list, but I don't know if I'm out of my mind for that one, but I feel like, P Dog can go off from time to time, so I guess that's more of a gamble in itself.
Yeah, I mean, he's a player that can go off. I think like the knock against him is that yeah, he's very hot and cold, but then he also doesn't get hill time. Like yeah, if this was the money ball, the he gets on base, it's like, but he gets hill time, but Priest doesn't get hill time. So it's a little tougher. Like he's not their primary hill time getter. And so like yeah, he does have this like yeah, he could legitimately score 50 points. Like he scored sub 50 or 50 in 3 of their last 10 games. Like that's just a really tough spot for when he's playing on a team that's arguably one of the better teams in the league. To have the chance to score 50 or less is just tough. Like, and that's just yeah, that's what happens when you're not a hill time getter. Is yeah, you have one bad game, but you're not getting any extra points from the hill. Like, well, throw that one away. So yeah, I don't know. I'm definitely colder on Priesta for that reason. But yeah, if New York 3-0s and he has one good respawn, easy money because yeah, 6.6 is nothing.
This might be the biggest bloodbath of the weekend. This game that I'm about to tell you. Vegas Legion, Minnesota Rocker. Two teams who are neck and neck right now fighting for champs. This is going to be a bloodbath.
Unbelievable. Yeah, unbelievable game. I mean, yeah, people are gonna be wearing their hearts on their sleeves for that game for sure. I mean, obviously we've seen Clay getting really hype recently, but yeah, I mean this game is unbelievably big for both teams. I think if Vegas loses this game, they're in a really bad spot. And so and also depending on what happens to them earlier in the weekend as well. But if they were to lose their first game to Atlanta and come into this game and lose, I think that might be curtains. And so, yeah, you're going to see Vegas playing, yeah, playing for their season basically in this game. I think Minnesota probably too. If Minnesota loses this game or if Vegas steals their other game against FaZe and then comes into this game and wins, Minnesota's going to be sweating too. So, yeah, this is a huge game. Um, just looking at the prices here, Fame at 6K is interesting. Like I think, what does Vegas have this game at? They have slight advantage to the Legion in this game, which I think is interesting. I would have seen this game as more of a heads up game to me. Pretty evenly matched, but they seem to think that Vegas has the edge. I take that information in because yeah, that's additional information that I can use when I'm making these lineups to say, okay, maybe Vegas is a little stronger than I'm giving them credit for. I am a known Vegas Twitter doubter, so I don't think about it as much. But yeah, Fame at 6K seems low. He has a smaller sample size to go off of. Yeah, actually to get off on a little PrizePicks point here, which is like when you're trying to predict points or kills per game on players, when they have small sample size, it's less meaningful. We don't know as much about that player yet. It's like I try to stay away from those players on PrizePicks because yeah, I'm basically betting blind if I only have a few games to go off of. So Fame is a tough one because he doesn't have as big of a sample size as some other players. But at 6K, he can't be any lower. And so like if I think his range of potential skills or like fantasy point production is wide, then there's a lot of probability of him being a good value at the minimum price on DraftKings. So
I
I
know
love
you,
Fame at 6K.
I know what you're telling me, Doug. You know, you can't take into consideration what they're fighting for, or anything like that. But you have Glacier again, and that sounds like a very high on him because I am. You got Glacier who's fighting for his season right now. He's 31 years old. You know, he's been here before. He's putting it all out there. 110% doesn't exist, but if it did, he'd be going for it. 6,400, only $400 more dollars than Fame.
So I think my counter to your point here is that I think everyone in this game is giving
No, it doesn't
110%.
exist. So
And
no
then
one is. No one is. It
yeah,
doesn't
but
exist.
if it did exist,
Yes.
they'd all be giving it, and then doesn't it just cancel it out? Like I think if this is a game, we do see this type of game sometimes where it's really meaningful for one team and not meaningful at all for the other team. And in those games, I might almost agree with you that like, yeah, if this is a game, if this was against Tech against Optic, and Optic had already qualified and they're already a secured first seed for the major, but Vegas needed to win this game to make champs or whatever. I would be maybe saying, okay, maybe we see a different Vegas team here. They're going to be playing their hearts on their sleeves. But here, yeah, I think it's like both teams want it bad. Like both teams are going to, I mean, obviously Clay is very like, like passionate outwardly, but I think for all the players, this is going to be a really big game. I mean, yeah, but 6.4K is super cheap. I think you look at the prices here, you'll notice that they alternate back and forth. Vegas, Minnesota in terms of pricing. That's I even remember that from the old like NHL baseball days. That's a classic DraftKings lazy pricing move to just alternate if the teams are similar in skill level. They just alternate they sort the teams by their fantasy points and then just alternate them down the list. So like I see this and go, yeah, this pricing is probably pretty inefficient. So yeah, I don't mind Clayster either. I'm just yeah. I'm against the idea that he's going to drop 40 first game because it's a big game for him, because it's a big game for everybody.
Yeah, fine. Good luck this weekend. I'm taking them. Toronto Ultra and Optic Texas. Very good matchup in itself. What do you think?
This is a banger matchup. Yeah, I think this is probably the biggest high profile matchup of the weekend. I mean, last week, I mean, we had some definite like some Goliaths going after each other last weekend with the Optic Atlanta, LAT New York. Like we had some of these big boy matchups. I think this is probably this week's marquee matchup here, Texas versus Toronto. I mentioned Scrappy and Dashy as both the types of players that can be just like insane for their team, or just like so insane that at any price they're worth it. You'll also notice again here, if you're looking at this pricing, we've got a classic Toronto, Texas, Toronto, Texas. If you sort them down the list, another DraftKings original here and pricing. So yeah, it's, do you think Scrappy's worth 10K? I think Dashy at 9.8K against Toronto. That seems ridiculous. I think Dashy is, yeah, I think Dashy with the being the favorite coming in to play Toronto. I don't know. I think Dashy at 9.8K. I'd take that any day probably. Ghosty now dropping back down to 6.2K for this game as well. I think that's an insta lock. Yeah, Ghosty is, if not number one, number two in hill time per game. 6.2K. That's crazy. Yeah, a lot to like about this game from that perspective.
It's low. The money guns are out. We got another bounty match. We got Boston Breach and Seattle Surge. Could be a good one. Could be a good one. What are we thinking on this? Let's see if Big Wake is number one for price 10.4 on Sunday. It's a lot of money right there.
10.4 for Wake, but 9.8 for Dashy.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting.
What do they know that we don't know, Doug?
Yeah, when Wake drops 60 first map, I'll be like, these guys got hold of the script, didn't they? But yeah, Pred at 9.4K compared to Wake at 10.4 is laughable, I would say. Pred's averaging 109 points per game. I think, yeah, maybe it goes back to the same point I made earlier, which is like, do you believe that Pred, actually, honestly, yeah, I don't think it applies, but like, do you think that Pred can do well even if his team doesn't win? Because yeah, I think Boston will be favored here. But yeah, is Pred going to do Pred things even if Boston wins this game is the question. I'd say yes, because I don't think Boston is in the same caliber as Texas. And like, I was even then having trouble seeing how he couldn't drop 40 in a game or something there, even if they lose. I like Pred here a lot at 9.4. I think that like, yeah, it's just so high upside. Maybe not in, no, I mean, I'm playing him in cash probably too, at least at this point. I think Pred 9.4, like, what's the worst thing that can happen to Pred? Like, yeah, how many games has he gone negative in the whole series? Like, I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but like, it can't be that many. And so, yeah, 9.4, that's tough to not want to play there. Kremp, another small sample size question here. Obviously, if you're looking at the points, he's averaging 106 points per game over the games that he's played. However, he has not played that many games. He remains 6.6K today. Sorry, on Sunday. He's a tough one. We see Lamar at accuracy at 6K as well. Again, another just like, if he gets in the hill, he gets on base. Like, I think Lamar here is a strong play as well. Honestly, yeah, a couple interesting plays here. I'm not sure how you feel about like playing Kremp, or like how much you like Kremp. I mean, obviously you might be a little bit biased, but like, yeah, he's obviously been putting up some pretty impressive numbers for Boston. 6.6K, you feeling that?
I am, and I'll tell you exactly why. I think with the roster change, having Reese back in the equation, Reese is he's like, as you know this, he's a faster player, but he's more like, he's the one rotating. He's like doing a lot of the dirty work as well. I think now Kremp more than ever will have the confidence to play as he plays, where it just get in your face and fuck you up. I think,
Yeah.
I think he's more comfortable doing that now, knowing that he has that support behind him. And I'm not saying that Nero wasn't a great player, but Nero and Reese were different players. and I
Yeah.
think Kremp and Nair were the same player. But
Yeah.
now I feel like Kremp more than ever has the confidence to actually play like himself.
Yes, we saw him put up 102 against Toronto. Yeah, in the 5 games that he's played on DraftKings slates, which is not all of them, but the games that were that had games around them, he's scored 98, 128, 104, 99, 102, and he's 6.6K. So yeah, it's hard to think that he won't be able to make the value at 6.6K. He was positive in 4 out of those 5 series, and even in the one that he was negative, he scored 100 points. So um, yeah, he has a chance that he can be getting some hill time. But yeah, he can also just pop off and get all the kills, and it doesn't matter. He won't need the hill time. So yeah, I tend to agree with you that I think Kremp is like we haven't seen a lot of him, but I've seen enough to think that he's worth 6.6K.
Yeah.
I don't think any world in which like at the last game of champs or maybe the first game of champs, we're still seeing 6.6K Kremp. Like I think we're going to be seeing 7.6K, 8K, maybe like he starts to settle out, but like he's still too low. Yeah, he's been under 7K in all of his last 4 games. He was min price in one of them, 6K, and he scored 99 fantasy points. So yeah, I think he's a pretty solid play.
I am bullish on Kremp. Kremp.
Um,
Uh, I'm bullish on it. All right, so that is the weekend's games. For the people listening, a little different than we did it on the first one. So please give us feedback if you like, kind of, flying through those. We can kind of bake other things in if there's more info that you feel like we left out. But there's also a lot of information, and we want to just make sure we're, picking out the good parts to help you, build the best lineup possible. Um, but that is the weekend. Doug, do you have any final things you want to say? Anything, that's top of mind that you want the people to know?
no, I'm look forward to more people being able to listen to the podcast. Feel free to reach out to me. I made this plug last time too, but yeah, reach out to me if you have questions or want to hear things on the podcast next time or things to talk about in between. I'm gonna try to continue to tweet out just like yeah, sort of my betting journey through the weekend as they go, just like games that I think are interesting, maybe spots that I think are interesting as they go. So yeah, feel free to fire back and say, well, did you think about this or whatever? I'm happy to hear that sort of thing. Happy to hear feedback on yeah how the podcast went. I think the way that we form it today, I think is very helpful. Where we start with some of this nice information that is evergreen that you can take and apply to your fantasy or your prize picks anytime you want. And then yeah, if you're interested in specific games, we'll give you that too. But yeah, I'm open to any feedback.
Hell yeah. And, yeah, I know you're thinking, guys, oh, I should close out of the podcast. Now it's over. You're going to want to stay because, once we wrap up here, you're going to hear two great lineups from two different perspectives with Dr. Doug Levy and Doug Censor. It is the start of Brain versus Brawn, so you're not going to want to miss that. Follow that journey. It's going to be awesome. But for myself, Chris P, and Dr. Doug Levy, thank you for tuning in to episode 2 of Quick Fix Fantasy, and we will see you on the next one.
All right, what's going on, guys? It's Dr. Doug, and I'm just going to be walking you through how I made my Sunday DraftKings lineup for our little Brains versus Bronze segment we've got here with Doug Censor Martin. So, as I said before, normally I'd be on the other Doug side. Us Dougs need to stick together, but just for the sake of a game, just for the sake of competition, I built a little lineup here that I hope will beat Doug head to head. So I think the most important thing I was thinking about when I was making this lineup is that it is a head to head. So I don't need a top 1% outcome. I don't need to score the most points. I just need to score more than Doug scores. And so I want more consistency in my lineup. When you're building a cash or a head to head lineup, you want more consistency. So then I'm looking at the slate. So the Sunday slate that we're going to be competing on has 3 fairly even games on it, which definitely makes a little bit of a difference. So we've got Minnesota versus Vegas, Seattle versus Boston, and then Optic versus Toronto. All 3 games are fairly even. Right now, Bet365 has Vegas as the largest favorites on the slate, but not by a whole lot. That makes it a little tougher. We're not really looking at a lot of 3-0 potentials here, which can score points for players that might not score points otherwise because of the match not played bonuses that you get if you don't play maps 4 or 5. So that is the first thing that I notice when I look at the slate is that we've got some fairly even games. The next thing I look at is, are there explosive players? I think there are five or six probably explosive players in the league right now from a DraftKings perspective, where even on games where they lose, they have what I would say is really high floor. Like the worst case scenario for these players is pretty high. And so three of those players are playing on the slate, which is Dashy, Pred, and Scrap. Those are three players that can score 100 points in a game that they lose. And so I want to get as many of those in my cash lineup, my head-to-head lineup as possible. And so um, I start with the team slot. I mentioned this on the podcast itself as well, but I do think that looking at the cheap teams in the team slot is important, especially if you're trying to fit more of these high floor explosive players like Dashy, Pred, and Scrap into your lineup. I noticed right away that Optic is the second cheapest team on the slate at 2.4K. Playing Toronto, they're favored in the matchup, but more specifically, I have them as a better search and destroy team than Toronto is. And I've mentioned before that the team slot on DraftKings scores the majority of its points through search and destroy, since you get points for rounds one, and search has the most rounds in it. So immediately, I really like Optic at 2.4K. I'm getting not having to spend very much in a team that like could potentially score a lot of points. But even if Optic lose 3-1 and they win the search, I'm going to be pretty happy with Optic for the team slot, and it gives me a lot of flexibility for the rest of the build. Um, then I usually like to look at the low price guys, who's going to be able to help me get as many studs in my lineup as I can. I think immediately I gravitate towards accuracy at 6,000, which is minimum price for a player. Anytime you have a guy who gets a lot of hill time, those usually tend to be really high floor, like really high worst case scenario players, because hill time gets you points, and like even if you lose, you can still get a lot of hill time and hard point. So immediately I really like accuracy. I also really like Kremp at 6.6K. He's had a lot of really big games and we have a small sample size, but at 6.6K I feel pretty confident playing him. And then I think there's one other aspect here, which is that I think that Doug will probably play Kremp because they were teammates together, and I know Doug's a ride or die for his boys, and so I got to respect that, but also I want to use it against him, because if we can get a matchup here where it's only 5-on-5 instead of 6-on-6, or get as many players matched between them, I hope that my analytics can beat out Doug's game knowledge. So I think that Doug thinks that Kremp is a good player, and I think that he's a good value on the slate, and so I love Kremp at 6.6K. Lock that in. So now I've got 3 slots left, and I've got enough money to play Dashy, Scrap, and Pred. The question is, which of them should be the captain? So I think Dashy as a captain probably makes the most sense here. All 3 have high upside, but Dashy's favorite to win, where both Scrap and Pred are underdogs in their games. And so I think Dashy might have just like a little bit more upside because of that. I think a good cash game lineup here could probably play any of the 3 of them as captain if you have enough room for them. So that gets me a lineup that works: accuracy, Kremp with Optic, and then Dashy, Scrap, Pred with Dashy as the captain. After I look at it a little bit, I don't like the fact that my lineup doesn't have anyone from the Vegas Minnesota game. In cash, you kind of want to diversify your assets a little bit, so that if like one game doesn't go the way that you're hoping it does, you don't just get completely burned. And so I don't like the idea that I don't have anyone from this game. In case, like, let's say the Seattle game it's a stinker. Seattle doesn't do well. Pred doesn't really do much of anything, and so maybe Lamar also doesn't have a good game. And so I'd rather maybe get off of accuracy and try to find another cheap player, because there are other options here, and I think that's sort of where I ended up landing. So I had a little extra cash as well with that lineup with Dashy as the captain, and so I can get up to Clayster at 6.4K from accuracy at 6K, and I like that more. I think Ghosty is an even smarter pick here, but at 6.2K, but I don't want a 3-stack Texas, kind of for the same reason, is I don't want 3 players on Texas, Dashy, Ghosty, and Optic in the team slot, because if Texas does poorly, like I'm pretty much just dead on arrival. So that's where I get to my final lineup here, is swap accuracy for Clayster, and my final lineup is Dashy in the captain, Optic in the team slot, Pred, Scrap, Kremp, and Clayster.
All right, everyone. Like I said, we were going to do a little breakaway to Doug Censor, and just because he's playing today, he has to stay locked in, so the times really didn't work out. but it's okay going forward. You know, you will be seeing the segment more often. Is it brain versus brawn? Is it, crunching numbers versus crunching bodies? We're just going to see how it goes. Doug is in the field. Doug Martin's in the field, really playing this game. Been around for a long time. Doug Liebe crunches these numbers, really knows the game like the back of his hands from an analytical standpoint. So we're gonna compare two, and we're gonna see who's able to put the best lineups together, who's gonna have the best record going forward. But it's gonna be very interesting to say. So without further ado, hello, Doug Censor Martin, not Doug
Hello,
Levy.
Chris.
So we got the Sunday spray and pray from Doug. That's the name of the competition on here. The lineup is Joe Awakening at the captain spot, Clayster, Hook, Shotzi, Donnie Temp, and for his team he picked Optic Texas.